Hello and welcome to Point to Point. If you've been following my channel for a while, you've seen a lot of pleasant bike route footage, filled with tree-lined streets and beachside paths, lazy rides through parks, relaxed commutes, and mostly wide-open bike lanes. Needless to say, that's not always the reality of urban cycling, especially in the US. If your bike commute or casual riding takes you on city streets, then you know there are a wide range of obstacles you might find in your supposedly designated strip of asphalt, sometimes several in one block. Today I want to share with you what I consider the top 10 bike lane headaches an urban biker can face. I think you'll agree with most of them, but there are a couple that may surprise you. Without further ado, on to the countdown. Well, okay, not quite onto the countdown. First, I want to note a few honorable or dishonorable mentions. Maybe these are more annoyances, but I thought they were worth including. First, you've got vegetation. I know, it sounds bizarre, but there is one particular bike lane in Chicago that has weeds growing out of the sidewalk and taking over half the bike lane. Ironically, it's a protected bike lane, just not protected from weeds. I might need to head out there with some hedge trimmers to take care of this myself. Next up, potholes. What, the classic road annoyance doesn't even make the top 10? And that's right. The biggest reason is that while these are annoying, they're constant. They might grow, but they never move. You know where to expect them, and they're generally not that hard to avoid. A second cousin of potholes is puddles. These are sometimes easy to predict and avoid, but the surprise ones caused by a clogged gutter or a heavy downpour can ruin an otherwise pleasant ride. And unless you have good fenders, even smaller puddles can leave you wet and dirty. Not a good look if you're headed to work. Oh, and let's not even mention the puddles that turn to ice. Moving on, this one might seem a little contradictory given the transit videos I make, but trains definitely fit in that annoyance type of obstacle. You don't usually have to wait too long, but the waiting always seems to happen at the most inopportune time. It can feel like the train is hardly moving. And sometimes the train truly isn't moving at all. This is especially fun on a cold, foggy winter morning. Last up in the honorable mention category is wrong way bikes. These can get dangerous on busier streets when one of the bikes needs to veer out into traffic. Even protected quiet lanes can be tricky when there aren't any obvious bailouts. It's a game of chicken that I never enjoy playing. Okay, now for real, on to the top 10. Coming in at number 10 is roadwork. Hey, here's one obstacle that drivers and bikers can agree on. And this should be the solution for potholes and puddles, right? Well, yes, in the long run, but in the short run, not so much. Road construction on streets with bike lanes typically means the bike lane gets removed and the street becomes an unmarked mayhem. If there's a silver lining, it's that vehicles are often going to travel more slowly through these areas, and slower means safer for bikes. Still, it's not much fun trying to navigate a path to safety, rolling down a road that's been scraped of its top layer and all markings. Alright, at number 9 we have buses. I know. First trains, now buses. Let me explain. On streets with unprotected lanes, a bus on one side and the door zone on the other, this feels really uncomfortable. Buses also have that fun feature of making constant stops, and often needing to pull across the bike lane to make those stops. This would be higher on the list if it wasn't for the importance of public transportation and the fact that most bus drivers do a pretty good job yielding to bikes. I say most. Whoever was driving this bus thought the street markings just didn't apply to him. Buses like this are more like a top 3 obstacle, but luckily this isn't too common. Also in the category of large-scale obstacles, at number 8 we have building construction. This could be construction equipment or trucks parked in the bike lane. That's if you're lucky. The more likely scenario is that you have a multi-season, perhaps multi-year headache where vehicle traffic and bike lanes get squeezed together, leaving a tiny corridor of safety in between moving vehicles and a concrete wall. Well, at least the wall isn't going to move, unlike doors. You might think this should be higher on the list, and truly the damage a single door can inflict on a bike rider is significant. If a biker tries to swerve to avoid the door and instead gets hit by a moving car, the result can be catastrophic. I'm not trying to downplay that. This is a very dangerous obstacle lurking on busy streets as well as quiet side streets. But being attentive and cautious and trying to ride outside the door zone can significantly reduce the risk of incident and injury. That's why doors only land at number 7 for me. Speaking of risk of injury, bikers aren't the only ones who can get injured in a bike lane. At number 6, you've got pedestrians. Whether crossing at a mid-block crosswalk or getting into or out of a car, or just strolling along with a bag full of food, pedestrians pose a serious risk to themselves and cyclists. They're liable to dart out from between cars, and because bikes are quiet, they won't necessarily know you're coming. If I think about my closest calls over the past 12 months, several of those near accidents involve people wandering into the bike lane. Hey, halfway to number 1. This would be a great time to give this video a like if you haven't already. Now back to the countdown. Number 5, schools and daycare. Really, this is any location along your route that could have a surge of vehicle traffic for a short window of time. School drop-offs in an urban setting are sometimes a free-for-all, with every parent maneuvering to get their kid to the door with minutes to spare. On top of the vehicle congestion, you have doors opening left and right, kids trying to cross streets, and bikers being generally ignored. My word of advice? Try to ride through these areas half an hour earlier or later. It will be a relative ghost town in comparison. Look how relaxing the same street is if you beat the school rush. Number 4, snow. Not everyone deals with snow, but depending on where you live, this may top your list. It could be a consistent obstacle all winter. Or it could be only an occasional obstacle, but on those occasions, wow, even a few inches can be a big problem. Sure, the streets get cleared, but much less attention is paid to bike lanes, often staying sloppy and slippery for days. In a best-case scenario, the lane gets half cleared, pushing you out toward traffic. In a worst-case scenario, the street gets plowed into the bike lane. And protected bike lanes sometimes have it worst of all, not getting cleared or getting sidewalk snow dumped onto them. Total disrespect for bikes there. At number 3, we have a pretty obvious one, delivery trucks and garbage trucks. The disruption from these is huge, sitting right in the bike lane and part of the lane of traffic, forcing bikes nearly into oncoming traffic. Even if these large trucks make it to the curb, they're still blocking at least half the bike lane. I'd rank this category higher if not for the essential nature of what these trucks provide. Someone needs to collect the trash, and someone needs to deliver supplies to stores and restaurants. The best way to avoid this is to try to find a route through a less commercial area, if that's an option. Now, number 2 is not as obvious as some of the previous ones, but hear me out. To me, the second biggest obstacle is poorly parked cars. What do I mean by that? Primarily, it's going to be a car parked along the curb, but not close enough to the curb to stay out of the bike lane. As a result, the car ends up partially parked in the bike lane. Individually, this isn't a huge issue, but the problem is that it happens so frequently, and each time it nudges a biker a few inches further into the lane of vehicle traffic. Now, I'll admit, in a big city with lots of parallel parking, this can get tricky. It's not always done with malicious intent, but I often see cars parked into the lane where the driver clearly had plenty of room to maneuver closer to the curb. These are the ones that really burn me up, where the driver obviously didn't care about anyone else trying to share the road. And finally, at number 1, any driver picking up or dropping off people or food. This includes Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Grubhub, taxis. It doesn't matter. Not only do these vehicles add to overall street congestion, but they're constantly stopping to drop off passengers or packages or food, or waiting to pick up new ones. And where are they most likely to stop or wait? You guessed it, in the bike lane. What's frustrating is that very frequently, curbside parking is available a few feet away, but these drivers want to be able to quickly get back into the flow of traffic. Unfortunately, that ease of re-entering traffic comes at the cost of the bike lane being clear. Sometimes these drivers manage to block both bike lanes temporarily with a mid-block U-turn. Like poorly parked cars, this one is a constant thorn in the side of bike riders, and that's why it's my number 1 obstacle. So that's it, my top 10, or maybe bottom 10. Although this video had a bit of a cynical tone, I want to end on a positive note. These bike lane obstacles are not insurmountable, even when several of them pop up on the same block. Sometimes the key is understanding where the worst obstacles are, and adjusting your route to work or the store or back home to avoid as many as possible. Sometimes the key is mental fortitude to keep getting back on the bike. And when you notice a road construction project that's finally been completed, or an unexpected improvement to an existing bike lane, or an Uber driver who pulls all the way to the curb, you can be grateful for one less obstacle on that particular ride. Speaking of gratitude, I appreciate you watching to the end of this video, and I hope I've inspired you to face the bike lane obstacles on your next ride. Thanks as always, and I'll see you next time.